Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I'm going to be talking about my best books of the year so far. So we are now in July, which means that we have just passed the midway point of the year and it's time for all of that mid-year content. So this one is a video I did for the first time last year because I actually track within my reading spreadsheet my best book of each month, and I think that this is a pretty cool video idea to do because my best books of each month is not actually representative of what my best books of the year might be, because I only have 10 books in my best books of the year video. And also, while I have one best book for every month, there are some months where I read more really good books. So for example, my 2 best books of May may be better than my best book of June, and so the best book of June would not even make it into that end of the year video. So the rest of this video is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm just going to get straight into it, starting off with my January book, which is technically Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, but specifically Oathbringer Part 2. So in the UK, the chunkier Brandon Sanderson books are broken up into 2 halves. I'm not even sure if I read Part 1 this year or whether I read it in December, but Oathbringer Part 2 claims that top spot, and Oathbringer is currently my favourite book of the year so far, which is a little bit of a trend actually, because House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas was my best book of January last year, and that was also my best book of the year. So we'll see whether this sticks. We'll see if anything beats Oathbringer. But this is the 3rd book in the Stormlight Archive, which is Brandon Sanderson's most expansive and largest series to date within the Cosmere. It's going to be 10 books in total. Only 4 books are currently published, and at the rate that he's publishing them, which is actually pretty damn consistent, I think I'm going to be just about 50 by the time the final book in this series is published, and I'm definitely not looking forward to that, let me tell you. But the Stormlight Archive is a hard one to explain because the characters in it kind of accept the world around them as being completely normal, which means that they don't question a lot of elements, whereas you as a reader will question a whole ton of the stuff going on. But the first book in the beginning of the series is quite heavy on the politics and also on war. We are mainly following the Alethi armies. The Alethi are one of the kingdoms of the world, and all of the perspectives that we follow are either part of the Alethi and their armies or connected to them in some way. And the Alethi have been at war with a different race called the Parshendi for a very long time, since the Parshendi orchestrated the assassination of the Alethi king during a peace talk. So I can't really say too much more about it because my favorite thing about the series so far is learning as we go, and how Brandon Sanderson just ties all of his plot points and plot twists together so beautifully. So there are no plot twists in this series that come as a surprise, because you can very clearly see where he has laid the groundwork throughout the earlier books in the series to get to this point where this really wild plot twist that you actually didn't see coming is perfectly plausible and really well done. I personally just really love Brandon Sanderson in general because I think he is a master at misdirection, and while a lot of the elements of his novel really stand out and are amazing, like his characters and his world, I find that the way he plots his stories to be especially masterful, because he will literally give you the answers but redirect your attention to something else so that you don't notice that this little offhand comment that he made is actually a really big deal, and then he ties it into a plot twist that makes you feel kind of stupid, because if you'd have only known, you would have put it together a lot earlier on in the book or the series. The reason why I particularly like Oathbringer is because I got really emotional throughout the end of this book. It has kind of like an epic conclusion, like an epic finale to this installment, and the way that the magic came together, the plot twists, the betrayals in here, the actions of some of the characters. By this point you've been following the characters for like at least 3,000 pages, so even though you're only at book 3, you are very deeply connected to them. So anything that happens that may seem bad or may seem sad hits a lot deeper. The last like 100-200 pages of this absolutely blew me away. I still have not read Rhythm of War, and I'm really excited to do so, but I believe that around the 4th book is where it starts to tie into the Cosmere as a whole a lot more, and I'm kind of a little bit nervous about getting to that point and then having to wait like like another 2.5 years for book 5, and then have like 5 more books still to come in this series. My best book of February won't come as a huge surprise because it is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J Maas. However, I will say that I'm not actually sure if this is going to make it into my best books of the year. It depends what I read for the rest of the year, I guess. But the more distance I have from this particular installment in the series, the kind of less bothered I am about it, but it was still really good and I still really enjoyed it. So this is the 4th installment in the ACOTAR series, but it is the start of a new story arc. So I can't really tell you too much about the plot of this one, but ACOTAR as a whole follows a young woman called Feyre who is out hunting to find food for her family when she accidentally shoots a phase shifter in the eye, and she's dragged off to the fairy realm to live out the rest of her days there as punishment. It is a fantasy romance. There's plenty of ups and downs in the series. The end of the first story arc for ACOTAR is very different from where it started, but the 4th installment starts following a new set of characters. I believe the rest of this series is all going to follow different characters, and this book in particular follows Nesta and Cassian. Nesta is having some trouble dealing with the aftermath of what happened in the first story arc, and so she is sent away to kind of get her shit together, and Cassian is sent with her to help her out with that. So the thing that I particularly liked about this is that it does focus a lot on mental health. This does have a plot. It has a fantasy plot line. One of my criticisms of this book in particular is that the plot line does not feel as expansive and high stakes as I usually associate with Sarah J Maas. So my least favorite element of this book is definitely the plot. However, I think that this book specifically deals with mental health and trauma, especially the trauma that is typically faced by women at the hands of men, and I think that this did a really good job of that. I think that the mental health, like the PTSD rep in here, is particularly good, and it was especially emotional to follow Nesta on this journey of healing and recovery, and acknowledging that the way that she has been dealing with things is not particularly healthy. As well as that, this has a great deal of smut, really explicit smut, and this is the first book in the ACOTAR series that has officially been published as adult. Now I will say that in terms of it being published as adult, the only real adult thing about it is the inclusion of more heavy smut, which was pretty explicit in the second 2 books of the series, but in this one it is definitely adult smut level. But in terms of things like the world and the plot, I would say is actually less dense and less detailed and less expansive than it has been in previous books in the series. However, as you guys know, Sarah J Maas is my favorite author. I will eat up every single thing that she writes. This book was still 5 stars to me. I absolutely loved it. Just in comparison to all of the other books I've read from her, this is not ranking amongst my absolute favorite, but it is still pretty high up there. For March, we have one that I absolutely did not expect, and that is This Is How We Lose the Time War by Amal El Motar and Max Gladstone. So this is kind of one that you may not expect me to like, because this is a sci-fi romance. It's very short, so it has quite a few elements that I don't typically like in books. One is the length. This is way too short to be one of my favorite books. My favorite books tend to skew as like really thick, and as well as that, it is very ambiguously written. It has an extremely flowery, extremely poetic and beautiful writing style throughout, which is something that I do enjoy in series such as Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I love me a descriptive, beautiful and flowery writing style, but when it verges on being so beautiful and flowery that it really like hurts your brain to figure out what is actually trying to be said because you're digging through the metaphor and the beautiful wordplay, that is normally where I draw the line and I start to actually really dislike it. So this one definitely veers on the side of being so beautiful and flowery that you can't actually understand what's going on. It follows time travel. It is about these 2 agents that work for 2 warring factions, and their job is to alter time. So they go to places in the present, past and future, and they alter the framework of time to get the desirable results that they want for their factions. The way that the factions work differ. One of them is more like centered on nature and tends to deal more in the past, and the other one deals a lot more in technology and tends to do a lot more work in the future. And these 2 agents are enemies, and they start to leave letters for each other throughout time, and in the process of leaving these letters they do start to fall in love. So the sci-fi elements in here are difficult to understand, and I don't actually think you are supposed to understand them because that is not the point of the story. This is more of a romance on the backdrop of this sci-fi twisty turny time travel brain hurty backdrop, and it actually really works for me. I describe romances like this as a romance for the soul. So I mean, this is a romance for the soul as well, but this has like a lot of physical romance and like erotica and stuff. This is definitely like a beautiful love story about things like yearning, and that really spoke to me in this book. We all know I'm a sucker for a romance just in general, no matter what other genre it is. So when we have romance blended into a fantasy or a sci-fi setting, I am generally expected to like it. This one though, in theory, should have been a book that I hate, but for some reason that I still cannot truly explain, aside from that it has a beautiful poetical romantic romance, was a big hit with me and I absolutely adored it. For April, we went back to Brandon Sanderson, with my favorite book being The Well of Ascension, which is the sequel to The Final Empire, which still I think remains as my favorite Brandon Sanderson book to date. So I would not say that I enjoyed The Well of Ascension as much as The Final Empire, but I still really love this series. At the moment, I still kind of prefer it to the Stormlight Archive, but Oathbringer is like really up there with The Final Empire for my favorites. But in The Final Empire, we are following a man called Kelsier, who is putting together a band of allomancers to overthrow the Final Empire. The Final Empire is ruled by, is it the Dark Lord he's called? And he has been in power for 1,000 years. Now the magic system in this world is allomancy, and you have the Mistlings who can ingest one type of metal and harness its abilities, and you also have the Mistborn who can harness the powers of all of the types of metal and use all of the abilities. So Kelsier himself is a Mistborn, and while he's putting together this team, he stumbles across a young girl called Vin, who also happens to be a Mistborn. However, she has absolutely no idea that she is. So my favorite thing about this series is the way that the magic system is utilized. I want to say I do have a soft spot for a lot of the characters in here, but in this one I think it's the magic and the characters that are more up there, with the plot and the world building being a little bit more secondary. It still has all of the things that I mentioned about Oathbringer that I love about Sanderson in general, how you redirect your attention to deliver really epic plot twists that you don't really see coming, but this one just didn't have quite as much as the magic of the Final Empire for me. That being said, it was still set in a world that I loved, still following characters I loved, with a magic system I loved. I still loved how the magic was utilized. My favorite element of it is how cinematic it is in the fight scenes, and I can say with 100% certainty that this series has the best fight scenes that I have ever read. I have a tendency, like even in the Stormlight Archive, or especially the Stormlight Archive, I have a tendency to gloss over the fight scenes a little bit or zone out, because a lot of them tend to be a little bit more like swords and horses. But this one includes using the magic system to do things like fly through the air by pulling and pushing on various types of metal, which results in super dynamic, super cinematic fight scenes. I will say as well that this series feels particularly high stakes. Like I feel like with every book we're building up to this situation that we don't know how the characters are going to get out of it. This one had a few of my favorite tropes in as well, and I'm really excited to read The Hero of Ages, because I've heard from multiple people that Hero of Ages is one of the best conclusions to a series that they have ever read. And I have still, like, I've read 10, 11, 12, like quite a few Brandon Sanderson books now, but I have still yet to finish one of his series. So I think Mistborn is going to be the last one, and I'm really excited to see how it's going to wrap up. My favorite book of May was Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Tawny Man series, but the 7th book in the realm of the Eldlings overall. The Tawny Man series in particular is the continuation of the main character from the Farseer trilogy story, so I can't really tell you too much about this one in particular, but it is the first book in the 3rd series in the Eldlings. So we have a Fitz trilogy, we have the Live Ship Traders, which follows different characters in a different part of the world, and then we have another Fitz trilogy, and the pattern kind of repeat. So in the first Fitz book, which is the first book in the Farseer trilogy, Assassin's Apprentice, we are following a young boy called Fitz, obviously, who is abandoned on the steps of the keep at 6 years old by his maternal grandfather, who says that he would like him to go back to his father. Now Fitz's father is actually the prince in waiting, Prince Chivalry, and when Chivalry finds out that Fitz is on his way to him, he is is ashamed of his past behavior, abdicates the throne and moves to the countryside, which leaves Fitz in this really awkward position where nobody really knows what to do with him. And so he is mainly raised by the stable master Burrick up until he comes of an age where the king starts to take an interest in him and decides that it would be a good idea for him to train as the royal assassin, because he is part of the nobility by being kind of royalty, but he's a bastard, so he's also part of the common people as well and doesn't draw too much attention to himself. So the Tawny Man series picks up when Fitz is in his mid-30s, so we've had a 15-year gap between the two trilogies, and there is a very big overarching plot of the entire realm of the Eldlings that I still do not quite understand the scope of at this point, but it is the next continuation on the natural progression of this big story arc. And now we do follow very different themes in this one. This is centered quite a bit on the magic, but we still have a lot of politics in here as well, although the politics are more about different factions of the world and different types of magic, as opposed to like the royalty and the lords like in the first trilogy. So my favorite thing about the realm of the Eldlings as a whole is that Robin Hobb has this very thoughtful, emotive writing style, and these books, especially the Fitz books, are extremely character driven. You're locked in Fitz's head for the entirety of them, and there are a lot of slow moments throughout the series that are, I have to be honest, quite tedious to read, but they really build a deep connection with the character. So while I don't necessarily enjoy reading hundreds of pages of Fitz walking in the moment, I do also acknowledge that if we didn't have those moments, I wouldn't be as connected to him and the story as I am. So what this results in is really deep, impactful moments, and this book made me sob in a way that I have not sobbed at a book since 2018. It was a devastating moment that I knew was coming, because one of the main themes of this book in particular ties to this devastating thing, but the way that it was done was so beautiful and so well done that it just destroyed me, and I sobbed. And I thought I was vlogging when I did it. I read it, I sobbed. I vlogged, I sobbed. I thought I was done. I went to the kitchen, I sobbed some more. I sat in the garden, I sobbed. But I would say that Robin Hobb books are very well done. They're very slow moving, but they're very well done, very atmospheric, definitely very thoughtfully written, and particularly good at drawing emotion from people. So I'm excited to continue with Robin Hobb's books, and I think it's kind of expected that there will be at least one Robin Hobb book in my best books of the year video, but I'm just a little bit scared because there is a very sad tone throughout all of the Hobb books, especially the Fitz ones, all the way throughout, and we still have a way to go because this book marks like the halfway point of the series. I still have 8 books to go, and I feel like there's going to be a lot of tears. And the last book we're going to be talking about in this video, which is my best book of June, is very different to everything else that we've had in this video. I don't know, well, June was a bad reading month, but quality wise I would say it's fairly decent. But my favorite book of June was Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert, which is an adult contemporary romance. So I did not know what to expect. I don't read a whole ton of contemporary romance. I didn't know what to expect when I picked up this series, but this series is just so funny. So funny. The smut in here, because it is a smutty romance, is very good. I think that all of the elements of the romance, including the smut, but also like the sexual tension and the relationships between the characters, are all just so well done that they evoke the emotions from you that they are intended to evoke, and I have fallen in love with this series essentially. So Take a Hint, Dani Brown is the second book in the series. It follows the middle sister of the Brown sisters, Dani, who is a PhD student with commitment issues. She's had a series of fuck buddies, hasn't had a relationship in a long time, and she does not want one. So she asks the universe for a sign and a fuck buddy essentially, and the universe points her to Zafir. Now Zafir is a security guard at the university where Dani is working, and he is a hopeless romantic. He reads a lot of romance novels and he is constantly searching for his happily ever after. So Dani and Zaf know each other. She brings him a coffee every morning. They have an attraction, but they both want very different things. So one day there is a drill at the school. Dani gets trapped in the lift Zaf rescues her and carries her out of the building, where they are caught on camera by tons of students and end up going viral on Twitter under the hashtag Dr. Rugby. Now, Zaf also has a non-profit organization that he runs. He used to be a professional rugby player, and he has this non-profit where he coaches rugby and teaches the boys to deal with their mental health and embrace their emotions. And when they go viral, his organization starts to receive a lot of donations, and so Dani and Zaf agree to enter into a fake relationship to further help out this non-profit organization that Zaf runs. So in comparison to Chloe Brown, which is the first book in this series, I definitely prefer Zafir to Red, but I think I might prefer Chloe to Dani. I will say that they are both very similar in the plot structure, very similar in the writing style. I don't think that the voice of Dani and Chloe are too different, but I loved Chloe Brown so much that I just kind of wanted more of that, and you can't really have more of that without inserting conflict into the story that is just for the sake of conflict. So I actually didn't mind that this was kind of just more of the same, because that is exactly what I wanted, and having new characters means that you have a new story, a new conflict, without it being tedious just dragging out the story of the same characters. That is something to be aware of. Like, I don't think this did anything particularly different to what Chloe did, but because I enjoyed Chloe so much, I really didn't mind. So this one, in terms of it being light-hearted romance that also deals with difficult topics, because we have like anxiety rep in here, we have grief representation, and the first book also deals with chronic illness and domestic abuse. So you are getting those deeper topics, but with really great humor in a light-hearted manner, with really good and well written romance. So that is it. Those are my favorite books of the year so far by month. Down in my comments, please let me know what your guys' favorite read of the year so far is, because I would love to know. I think that my favorite is definitely Oathbringer of all of the ones in here, and I'm really excited to see if anything tops that, because I don't know what I'm going to be reading for the next 6 months, so I don't know if anything will. But that is it for this video, guys, so please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you will find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. That's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.